TPM Summit in the beautiful Mountain View. I'm Doran Katz, and I've got with me Dylan Thomas, and we're going to talk a bit about GitHub and about Tuckman's model. And Dylan just finished a talk earlier today, so we'll get straight into it. So, give a little bit of intro. Tell us a little about yourself.
Well, Dylan Thomas, I think if I go to the slide I presented, it said three things on it. It said tomato, because as you may understand, I'm sort of mostly American, but not quite.
Yeah.
Weirdly not. It said maps, because my background as a geographer was sort of my entree into the technology that I enjoy and learn today, sort of the software and automating maps, and here I am. So maps. And cycling, because I love biking, which has got nothing to do with anything, except I just need you to know that I love biking. But now I head up the TPM organization at GitHub.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I love cycling too, and geography is a huge passion of mine as well. I have my minor in GIS and physical geography. My dad was a geographer, so...
I'm a BS in geography. I worked at Esri for a long time, a GIS software company. So it's going around. It's good stuff.
I got a job there. I almost moved down there. It's just my wife didn't like the area. Whereas
really?
Yeah.
And these are how things turn. Yes, but here we are.
So great. Well, fantastic. So I know you gave a talk earlier on basically on Tuckman's model. So tell us a little bit about this model. What is this?
So it's a pretty simple model that describes organizational and team development. And it's got four phases: forming, storming, norming, and performing. And I think most people, when you hear that, are like, oh, it's that one. Tuckman came up with it in 1965 after doing a literature review and sort of distilling down what he felt like were phases that captured what it means for a team to come together. And so I don't even remember where I learned about it. It's been a while, but it's always spoken to me. Just the labels I find really, really helpful to call out how things are. It makes it okay to talk about a situation like we're storming. Maybe it sounds bad, but it sounds better than, oh my God, what's going on here?
Right.
I think we're in that phase. So it's a model that I feel is pretty practical and applicable to the situations that I find myself in as a leader, and I know the TPMs on my team find useful, whether they call it that or not, they find it useful to identify where they're at.
Right.
So it's just a practical model.
Right. So it normalizes basically the different phases, and as a team, for lack of a better word, I guess the maturity in terms of how well they're gelling together in different phases to get to that. Right.
Yeah, and the other part I think is it just sort of came to me in terms of fractals. Someone was sort of saying, well, what about the scale? I'm like, oh, it's actually scale. The model wasn't created in a scale independent way. He was talking about small teams, but I found it useful to talk about things at multiple scales. And one of the questions that someone asked today was like, well, what if things are cool up here, but there's, teams like storming down there? I'm like, it's happening to me this week. It's happening in the team, and it's okay.
Right.
We're wrapping up a program. There's a fifth phase that someone came up with at some point called adjourning. And it's like, it's okay.
Yeah.
So then we just that's fine. It's different scales simultaneously at different times. We're experiencing different phases of that model, and that's fine. And that's why I find it so useful, to be honest.
Right. And so it's cyclical as well, I suppose. We live in sort of a transient environment where you have engineering teams and TPMs, and people come and go constantly, right? So you go through those different phases. So I guess you have that cyclical aspect of that. Is there any pattern, anything you can kind of take from one to bring to the other? I guess that would help you mature at a different pace, or is there anything you can learn from going through these different phases? Let's say as a TPM, you kind of go, all right, we're in the final phase, go from storming to norming and all those things. Like, what happens when you go back?
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Well, I think we, as TPMs, we develop that toolkit that's appropriate to the situation, and I think you start to figure out which tools apply where. So if you think about a typical, like a retro, retro core.
Right.
Well, is that for forming? Well, I don't know. Maybe, depending on the situation. Is it for storming? That sounds like pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, most people would say it's a thing you do every 2 weeks after you run a sprint or a cycle, right? It's like, well, yeah, but if you think about things from an organizational perspective, which is kind of where I'm operating, like there's a reorg, for example, like something a little more dramatic than a program's reached its natural conclusion, but like, let's just stir the pot a whole lot for valid business reasons. But now you're like, I get the business reasons, but by golly, that's some churn right there. So what does a TPM do there? We come in and we provide that level, open-eyed, clear look. We sort of step back from it. We try and get away from the drama and the churn, and we just look at the situation for what it is. What are we trying to get done? Who's accountable for what? Do we agree on what needs to be done? Where do we have problems? And you just start working the problem. And I think in terms of which phase you're in, I think TPMs are actually really, really good at navigating where a team is at.
Yeah.
And again, because of this sort of scale independent thing or what the scope of what a TPM deals with, I mean, you may be dealing with a bit of a program that's like having a moment, and another big chunk that's like it's going fine.
Yeah.
And so you pick the tool from a toolkit that seems appropriate. And again, I think there's nothing special about the tools. It's the stuff we all do.
Right.
But you just you go grab the right one for the situation you're dealing with right there. But I do again sort of think that just being able to sort of call it what it is really helps you say, oh, okay, it's like your plumber. It's like we've got a leak under the sink. I'll grab the wrench.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned because in the previous podcast we're talking about different tools, processes, and things like that. But we're talking here about the human side of things, where almost like a therapist or a psychologist, you kind of assess, not even from what they're saying, but what they're not saying as well. Because you mentioned retrospectives, right? So one of the agile tools, and that's sort of an environment where people have to feel safe. They should be opening up on things and see what's working, what's not working, and that's a very evolutionary phase or stage. This, you mentioned before, maybe there's not something when you first meet, you can kind of open up and say, well, I feel this or feel that.
Absolutely not. I mean, that is a journey. So, in fact, if you're in a storming phase, is a retro the best thing? Maybe, but maybe folks aren't ready for that. Maybe there's a different kind of conversation, which is about building psychological safety first, so that you can have that, right? Yeah. But I think that's the part where I don't want to go overboard on being able to label it, but it is kind of handy to just sort of say, "Hey, it's looking a little stormy in here right now. That's okay, right? Yeah. It's predictable. Don't beat yourself up about it. It's normal."
Yeah.
So what should we do? What seems to be what problem are we solving? What decision do we need to make? Where are we kind of stuck? It honestly just it makes it easy to say it, so that you can then apply the tool or work the therapy.
Right. Well, you're not leaving them on there. You ask those type of questions where you're kind of like facilitating for them, building blocks for them to be able to kind of open up and kind of self assess or self fix things.
And again, I think for something if they're not there yet, if they don't know how to do that, that's when TPMs come in. We work on magic, it's like the tool, it's the, like you said, it's the people.
Absolutely, yeah. Then GitHub, how are you? Are any of these tools? I'm curious how you're implementing these, in your organization. How is that fair? What's the journey for you?
They tend to be really contextual. That's kind of what a bunch of my presentation was about. What I was trying to do is just simply tell some stories, because I was chatting with folks afterwards about a lot of it resonates, but as context is very different. So, for example, I was chatting about how we came into being as a team because someone was asking a very basic and helpful, question, like, how's it going on these, 24 or 25 things? And then there's the implicit unasked questions, because I'm not sure I'm getting the whole story right now.
Right.
And so, well, what do you do in that case? You're in this formation stage. Is there a recipe for that? Well, in some sense, you start asking questions, assessing the situation, just, those powerful questions you ask people. What goal are you trying to accomplish? What problem are you solving? Why now? And so we just ask those honestly, there's no magic. He's just asking simple questions to gain clarity, and then it's just the context within which you're asking that really sort of leads you to the next step. So, for example, we had a situation where TPMs. Let me step back and say, I made this statement about a guiding principle to say, let's agree that at GitHub programs are goals that are represented by wiggly boundaries around the org chart. In other words, we're aligned with goals first and organizations only by happy accident. That has consequences, that statement, right? Because it means, we don't go staff TPMs at the team level. And in fact, we don't staff TPMs organizationally, period. We just do it by the program. So why am I saying that? Because if you then look at that as the thing that comes out from forming, what are we even trying to, why are we here? Existential, to the storm is like, no, really, why are we here? What are we doing? And you get to the norming part, which is working your way through to principles that help you explain to everyone else how things are going to work. So when I go back to the context, I'm like, how do we do it at GitHub? What are the tools? What are the lessons others can learn? It comes down to boiling it down to principles first, so that you eventually know that the destination is norming and the performing. And that's the conversations I was having with folks after the meeting today, after the presentation, was saying, well, what's your situation? What what guiding principle do you need to use to get to the norming phase at the end? I don't know if I answered your question, I just said a lot there. But
well, a lot of data points that are interesting, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I'm interested in what you said before about allowing the abilities to fail, right? So when you talk about going to the norming phase, is it always natural that it's almost like with kids, right? You kind of hate with your kids, you kind of hate to see them fail, or make mistakes, but you want to have that safe space so they can do that, so they can eventually realize. And is that an inevitability? I guess is part of the.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah,
that is interesting, because the thing I was mentioning today was having trust in the TPMs who are closest to the work first.
Yeah.
Right. So if you go to okay, we're forming, things are getting weird, not weird, but predictably, difficult. How do you get to that better spot? Step one is listen to the people who are closest to the work. Trust the TPM's understanding of the situation, their skill set. And then try and generalize to things that you may do to improve the situation.
Right.
So it's really, I felt like Captain Obvious the entire time I was standing up there, because it does seem pretty obvious. It's just not easy.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's the obvious. A lot of times the obvious stuff isn't as obvious when you're in kind of the fog of war, fog of development. It's almost like football, the football analogy, where you kind of, or rugby, we kind of get all these players to kind of come up with this really interesting plays and angles, but sometimes they drop the ball when you throw the simplest things. So they kind of look ahead, and they kind of drop the ball when it comes towards them. So you kind of have to sometimes take a step back and look at the environment, the landscape, and kind of assess that way.
Yeah, and I'm supposed to sort of really answer your question. That's something that with that trust comes responsibility, right? So you sort of like as a leader sometimes, or even as a TPM. I mean, you sort of like like, okay, I can see where this is going,
right?
And but you think, what's the blast radius? Like, how bad could it get? And if it's, everyone has their own threshold for when you need to step in and like course correct or whatever. But to be honest, that's the thing I was talking about at the end, with the two questions to ask, which I found powerful kind of throughout any of those phases, which honestly have nothing to do with Tuckman's model, right? It's just, what problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah. Right.
And that's such a kind of annoying question, because it's so good.
Yeah.
So if you're sort of in the, okay, things are going to what problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah.
Why now?
Yeah.
Why do you have to solve it now?
Yeah.
And it's like, geez, that's frustratingly good, because it's that introspection, and then I feel like it helps get back to those guiding principles. Like, well, why do you say that? what generalization can we make? Is there a pattern we can pull out of there that we can then apply to other situations, which is what norming is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know from my time working at Amazon, two things that my takeaway is when I worked there is you start a project, you have tenants basically can explain, and those things are literally the first thing you see on the project status. It kind of reminds you what you're doing, and then if you're setting a project, you also have FAQs or rude FAQs, as I like to call them, because I like to go with some of the.
Can I give you a fist bump because that's what I call them too?
Yeah,
I love it. Right.
That's like the first two questions are rude FAQs. They're kind of like very blunt.
Yes. Yeah, I like that, and that's the part where I think it's rude FAQs that are. It's like permission to say it. I was literally that's part of the presentation was like, what's the rudest possible thing someone's thinking? Just write it, and then write a reason. Or just sit with it for a second, get over the emotion, and then write an answer to what you think their actual intended question is, and that actually gets you through a lot of the feels in that the storming phase.
Absolutely, you need to be comfortable. I mean, and a quick anecdote is when I was in Australia before I moved to the US, where I was working for the Australian company that was bought out by an American company, and the first thing they told us before the American bosses started coming is they're trying to teach Australians how to not be rude and not to ask rude questions. So we had to be very polite and to dress up and all that stuff. Yeah. So coming here now, learning about rude FAQs and all that.
It's what I think that's really interesting actually, because there is this. I'm not from the U.S., but I've been here for a really long time, so I feel like I don't know what the heck I am, like a soft, gooey Englishman wrapped in an American exterior, let's say. But it is interesting when we have people coming from different cultural backgrounds, different experiences, different languages they speak, and figuring out how to have those nuanced discussions. And there is something again that's sort of like that permission to just say the thing.
Yeah.
As opposed to like maybe the Americanism, which be like, oh, it's great, it's super awesome. Well, no, it's not actually. Yeah. Like, let's not sugarcoat it here, folks. It ain't super awesome. Yeah. It's like moderately okay at best. And here's the rude version.
Yeah.
If you go talk to, I have a story in my background where I was working, I was under some pressure to ship something, and this German engineer said, Dylan, stop stressing. Work the problem. It's like he was some guru from a launch at NASA instead of shipping something in a car. And it was like, right. He's giving me permission to calm the heck down and work the problem. And it's that same thing, because for me, I was like in that, it's almost like the mini version of the model. I was storming, I was stressed, I was worried, I was freaking out. And then it was like, I have the answer. And the answer is calm down, work the problem. I don't have the actual answer, but I know that the situation requires that you just chill. And that to me was one of those cultural things. It's like permission to work the problem, get worried. Yeah. This is like therapy. I love it.
Yeah. Well, I felt like we've gone through all the different steps in the model right in our interview.
Yeah, we have. Right. What are we doing now? Are we performing?
Yeah, we're getting close to a journey. But before we go, any interesting takeaways from the summit? Is this your first time here?
Yeah. Oh, it's incredible. I mean, we invited folks to GitHub earlier this week, some sort of leaders from TPM, because I feel like I sort of know my people are out there, but I've never been able to find my people, let alone meet them.
Yeah.
So Wednesday was really awesome for us in like smaller setting to just talk about real stuff. I mean, real and the like things that matter to us as like leaders and managers, what have you.
Right.
So that was great. And then to come here and like, whoa, I've had such, I don't know, like to look out at a group of people and know that they're your people.
Yeah.
Because when I do that presentation or I think about it, I'm super nervous because if I was saying that stuff to an engineering crowd, it'd be like pitchforks. If I was saying that to a bunch of product managers, like the hell you say. But the TPMs get it. It's their lived experience. So it's been really energizing. Like really, just tingly, just thinking about how cool it is to be around my peeps.
Yeah, I was going to say when I was going to give the analogy of being, sheep in a with a bunch of wolves because we're not really sheep, but
Yeah, right.
but whatever we are, the same species in a
Yeah, exactly. We're all sheep, or wolves, or whatever.
sheep that drive delivery.
We got to work on that analogy, but
yeah. But well, thank you very much, and I hope we get to see you on our podcast later this year, maybe next year. We'll
That'd be great.
We'll dive deep into different.
Well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, enjoy the rest.
We're performing.
We're performing.
Cheers, take care.
Thanks, everyone.